Mr. Brand Snavely with us from STSturf. With almost 35 years in the agricultural and sports turf markets, Brand Snavely has gained the confidence and trust to top 100 golf courses in world-renowned sports fields as a consultant. Brand Snavely is known for his surpassed level of customer service, knowledge of soil and water, data, and producing comprehensive application protocols that factor in historical analysis, soil structure issues, water quality, upcoming tournaments, culture practices, and more.
Thank you very much. And that's it in a nutshell. Thank you all for coming. Hope you had a good time and learned. No, I'm kidding. We're going to talk about water, the single biggest input. When I was on the farm 30, 40 years ago, water was very pure, very sweet. Whatever we added to it was enhanced because it was so pure. What I have seen is a gradual degradation and deterioration of water quality over the last 20 years, where I've taken historical analysis from specific sites 20 years ago, compared them to water tests now being conducted at that same site. It's appalling. And the water quality is only getting worse. And we're going to talk about some of the influence that's causing these issues with deterioration of water quality. But more importantly, what this is about is allowing to give you the tools to be able to calculate what your water brings to the table as a single biggest input, so you can help plan your fertility program more efficiently and factor in the constituents that are coming in with water based on the volume or the acre feet of water per acre per year. Single biggest input. First and foremost, before any nutrients are put into place, light, air, water is the foundation. If you don't have light, air, water, you're not going to do very well. And I thought this was a great picture to illustrate all three of those aspects. Although it's a little bit cloudy, we did have good, intense sunshine. It was a long day. Got the irrigation lake there in the forefront, so we have the water. We had good air movement. You can see there's nothing obstructing air movement, and we've got the light. This is put together by the USGA. It was done back in November of 2012. This was the USGA's Golf Use of Water, the Challenges and Opportunities. It was a USGA Summit on Golf Course Water Use. And as you can see, you have the different regions: the Northeast, North Central, the Transition Zone, the Southeast, the Southwest, Colorado, Upper West and Mountain Region, and the Pacific. If you come down, you'll see how much irrigated turf grass there is. One of the stats that I don't have here is about 80% of the golf course is irrigated. 20% is non-irrigated. In some cases, it's more than that because of rebates being offered by water companies to take out irrigated turf and replace it with non-irrigated, whether it's native or what have you. So that way, golf courses' dependence on water was reduced. It shows the water use in acre feet, and of course that's divided by the number of acres that's irrigated. The water use of acre feet, irrigated turf grass, and again, yours is around 2.9 acre feet of water. Well, I've talked to numerous people that are even between 4 and 6 in Colorado. I've talked to some people who are as low as 2. A lot of that is relevant based on the quality of the water. Do you have to implement the leaching fraction? Do you have to flush when you get into the season if you're not getting rainfall? So there's no crystal ball, but you can get close based on historical analysis, knowing the grass types, the quality of your water, to actually pinpoint how many acre feet of water per acre per year. This equates down 2.9 acre feet, 35 inches. So again, this was done by the USGA. There's a USGA regional agronomist by the name of Brian Whitlark. He works in the Southwest. Some of you might know him, maybe have had him at your golf course or your field. He created a device called the irrigation normalization chart. We had talked about this, and what he did I thought was phenomenal. Why? Because on a golf course, not all golf course greens are the same size. You may have a 4,000 square foot green, you may have a 6,000 square foot green. Your practice putter may be 8,000 square feet. You may have 4 heads on one, you may have 6 heads on another, but all the heads are flowing at 23 gallons a minute. What this allows you to do, and this is available on the USGA website, you can download it for free. It allows you to go from greens 1 through 18, your practice putters, put your gallons per minute, number of heads. What's relevant here also is it half heads or full heads, because if it's full heads, only half the water is hitting the green. So hopefully you have half ins, half outs, which gives you the ability to leach. You have poor water quality without washing out your bunkers and creating a maintenance nightmare. How many minutes per head at the desired depth of water, and how to adjust your irrigation computer accordingly. One of the things I'd like to point out is down here, you'll notice an 8,000 square foot green. It's got 6 heads. The average is 4 to 5, but with that 1 extra head, This is about twice as big as the rest of the greens, so he needed to run his irrigation computer to 129% to get the same amount of water on that practice putting green as he did the other greens. So it's not about going out and saying, yes, we need to water 6 minutes tonight. 6 minutes on this green may be good, but you may need 8 minutes over here. This is an equation that I developed after working with Dr. Oli Haribandi, the golf courses, and also doing my own research at various golf courses that had been transitioned to recycled water or who had implemented well water because potable water was getting so expensive. And with potable water during drought years, there's restrictions. So they wanted unlimited water use, so sometimes they were willing to use a poor water quality source as opposed to the potable water so they could actually have irrigation and keep the plant hydrated. So here, what I'm going to do is just kind of walk you through this. If an average green has 5 heads that flow at 23 gallons per minute, what I do is I send out a survey to the golf course. I ask them how many minutes a week they run their irrigation system during the growing season. If they flush, when do they start their flushing regimen? When do they end it? How long do they run their sprinklers during a flush cycle? And during the cooler periods of the year, you're not going to run for the same period of time as you do during the prime growing season. So those are the 3 parameters by which I fill out this survey. In this case, 5 heads, 23 gallons a minute. If you divide 152 by 4.33, which is the average number of weeks in a month, it's about 35 minutes a week that he's running these sprinklers. Times 20 greens, so he has 18 course greens and 2 practice greens. He's doing that for about 5 months of the year. And here in Colorado, that's pretty good because you guys typically start irrigating, April, May, June, July. August, September starts tapering off. October would be your shoulder season. And there's probably 2 to 3 months that you're not irrigating hardly any at all, if at all. So you're going to notice that for the 5 months, over 20 greens, he's using 1.7 million gallons. He does flush, but he only flushes 4 months out of the year when his irrigation water use is highest and he's using poor water quality. And he's using 60 minutes as the amount of time that he provided to me. When cool, he's running 40 minutes a month for about 5 months. And notice 5 months here and 5 months here does not total 12 months. So there are 2 months where he said, I'm not using any water whatsoever. When you add all of this up together, it comes to 2,760,000 gallons, 131,000 square feet, which is 3 acres. So what we're doing is we're dividing the total water use by the number of acres. He's using 2.82 acre feet of water per acre per year. Are you guys with me so far? Yes.
I talked to a golf course guy here, this is a number of years ago, here in Denver, actually, it's one of the city courses. He told me that during hot months and summertime, he uses 1 million gallons of water.
Okay, but remember, we're looking at strictly just greens right now. We're not looking at the total golf course. And again, I point this number out right here, 3 acres. So there's a huge, and that's not unusual. You know, you could use an acre foot of water, 325,851 gallons is 1 acre foot of water. And just in case as a refresher, that would be 1 foot of water covering 43,560 square feet. So this is 3 acres, but yeah, no, it's a good point, but yeah, we're only talking greens here because what we do is set up programs for greens, for tees, for fairways, so we break all the different areas because you don't water all the areas the same amount of time. So now going on, this is the next equation that is very relevant. I have an independent third-party lab that does the water test, and they provide the parameters or the quality of the water. So you'll notice that this water, and we're going to start with 4 different water sources, and all of these water sources were provided to me from Colorado parks and or golf courses and or sports fields. So I'm not going to name anybody, but I'm going to show you how much water quality can vary. Here we have a pH of 8.57, which is highly restrictive. If the soil mirrors the water quality's pH, you're going to restrict a lot of nutrients. Because once you get above 7.5, it becomes exponential. The EC, 0.1, this is really pure water. It's too pure. It's going to strip the soil. Water infiltration and percolation is going to be an issue. His total dissolved salts are only 64 parts per million. The adjusted SAR, 0.2. So you can water any type of grass with this water, you're going to be fine. And if you look across the constituents, you'll see that he's got 64 parts per million, which we can decompose some of that, get the benefit of the carbon dioxide. Bicarbonate is HCO3. Chloride, only 2 parts per million, sodium 3.4. You can see our calcium to sodium ratio is about 4 to 1. So that's beautiful right out of the gate. But look at the ratio of calcium to magnesium. If he doesn't amend the soil, he's going to end up with about a 20 to a 26 to 1 ratio of calcium to magnesium in the soil. Why? Because of the atomic mass. So calcium weighs 40. That's its conversion factor. Magnesium is let me see, 1224.3. So there's almost a 2 to 1 size difference between calcium and magnesium. When I first started doing this 15, 17 years ago, I tried to set up 8 to 1 ratios if that's what I wanted in the soil. I ended up with 16 to 1 ratios in the soil. So I soon realized I went back to the scrapbook, rewrote my methodology to take into consideration moles, or the atomic mass of these individual nutrient constituents. The other thing that's in short is 3.4 parts per million. So we're going to need to add some fertilizer or some amendments to the soil to be able to provide a food source to the plant. Why? Because of sufficiency levels of available nutrients. We would like to see 12.5 to 25 available parts per million of magnesium. Magnesium is at the center of the chlorophyll molecule. 1 magnesium, 4 nitrogen reacting with iron. That's your chlorophyll compound. Nothing is green without magnesium. If you have a shortfall of magnesium, you may get a good initial response, but you're going to get no longevity from the fertilizer application. So, and potassium, we'd like to see at 25 to 50 available soluble parts per million, and calcium 50 to 100. So you can see this water does not have enough of a nutrient load to sustain nutrient availability for the plant. So we need to supplement it. But we knew that because the water was pure. Now let's go to our second source. Or actually, let's take a step back. This is the next thing that I would do for the course that I'm working for. You can see that this water is so pure that I'm going to create a 35 to 1 calcium to sodium ratio. How I'm deriving this, I want about 6 pounds of total K per year applied on this particular golf course, about a half a pound a month. So we have to apply 5.4 pounds, the water is going to bring out in the other 0.6. If I apply 5.1 pounds of magnesium, the water is only going to bring in 0.18. And calcium, we're going to need to do about 18.7 pounds. With the addition of water, we're going to have a total of 21.1 pounds. What this is going to do is give us a few hundred parts per million over a course of a year to maintain and sustain that plant health. Now let's look at a water quality that's not quite so good, but it's good, clean water. And this gentleman actually stopped by the booth today, so Ryan, if you're out there, here you go. This is a Colorado golf course, what I call good, clean irrigation water. pH is much better at 7.57, EC is at 0.29. 0.25 to 0.5 is a good range, especially if beneficial salts are making up the majority of that EC. Now I have seen ECs as low as 0.3 and 0.4. It's predominantly sodium and bicarbonate. Well, then that's going to set you up for issues. So you have to offset that detriment and apply calcium, magnesium, potassium to offset that imbalance. Our TDS is 186, our adjusted SAR 0.77, so we're still in very good shape. Bicarbonate is still manageable, chloride 16, sodium at 13, we're good. Calcium's at 33 parts per million and magnesium at 7, almost a 4 to 1 ratio. So actually the ratio of calcium to magnesium is going to set us up for about an 8 to 1 ratio in the soil. So the water is doing us justice. But look at the potassium, only 2.69 parts per million. And we want 25 to 50 soluble parts per million, so we're going to have to supplement with potassium. If he doesn't amend the soil, he's always going to be low in potassium. So that would be my highest priority, is putting out potassium. The other thing to remember about potassium is it has a single positive charge, just like sodium. So if the plant wants a drink of potassium, the sodium is in greater availability and solution in the soil, the plant's going to take up sodium in place of potassium, which is going to wreak havoc with plant physiology. So this is how I would amend this particular water source. I could create an 8.75 to 1, which is well over the 2.5 to 1, and actually 5 to 1 is ideal. But so it's 8.75. We can create the 4 to 1 calcium magnesium ratio, so we end up with an 8 to 1 ratio in the soil, 3.5 to 1 calcium potassium. And the reason why we did that, as far as, sorry, I hit the back button. The reason why I want 3.5 to 1, even though we want more magnesium than potassium in the soil, because there's only a single positive charge, you don't have a strong attraction to negative charged organic matter or clay particles. So therefore, potassium is going to leach much faster than magnesium, which has a double positive charge. So for every acre foot, now I'm going to go back and explain the black numbers, because I didn't do that on the last water quality. So the black numbers offsets 1 acre foot of water. We multiply it by the total number of acre feet of water per acre per year. That gives us our annual totals to apply over a 12-month period. Now we still hit our 6 pounds a K. Now we're, instead of applying a lot of magnesium, we're applying 3.9 pounds, but at the end of the day, we're getting 5.28 pounds total when we combine what's in the water already. Calcium, we have to apply 15.2 pounds of the 21 pounds, and that's going to set us up for all of our ratios. So far, we've seen ultra pure water, and we've seen good clean water. This is the best water source that I've shown you so far, and it's going to be the best water source that I show you once I show you the next 2 slides, or the next 2 water sources. This is poor groundwater, so this is actually coming out of a well. So pH is up at 8, the ECW is at 1.264, and by the way, that 809 is a function of the EC, the conversion factor is 640. So if you take your electrical conductivity of the water multiplied by 640, it tells you how many total dissolved salts you have. The adjusted SA, or the SAR, is 3.6, and in this case, the adjusted was actually lower. And the reason being is there's not much bicarbonate. So the adjusted SAR not only takes into consideration how much sodium you have versus calcium and magnesium, but factors in bicarbonate and its precipitation potential. Bicarbonate is HCO3, calcium carbonate is CaCO3, magnesium carbonate, MgCO3. So what ends up happening is there's an old saying that bicarbonate will promote sodium to drive the soil solution. The way it's doing that is it's reacting with calcium and magnesium to precipitate it into insoluble lime. The plant available form of calcium and magnesium is Ca++ and Mg++. So if you have MgCO3 or CaCO3, calcium carbonate or magnesium carbonate, plant can't utilize it. It's sitting in the soil until it's either acidified or microbially degraded and broken, and so that way the plant can take it up in ionic form. The bicarbonate, again, 86 parts per million chloride, now we're up there. We're close to 100 parts per million of both chloride and sodium. Chloride's a negative charged anion. Sodium is a positive charged cation. There is an affinity for those two to react and become sodium chloride. And what is sodium chloride? Add a little non-caking compound, it's table salt. Water will always move from an area of low salt concentration to high salt concentration. So if you allow your sodium chloride to build in the soil, even though you have moisture in the soil, you may start seeing signs of wilt because what is in the soil is not available to be taken up by the plant because the salt is holding it too tightly. Phosphate, we're okay there. Potassium, we're at 14.5 parts per million. Look what our weak link is now. Now we need to apply magnesium. So we have about a 9-10-to-1 ratio. We're actually about, 7.5, 15. So that'd be about a 6-to-1 ratio, which would result in about a 12-to-1 ratio in the soil too high. So we need to add more magnesium. Sulfate is high. So now this may impact or influence what amendments we use to get our magnesium. Magnesium sulfate may not be the product of choice. We may want to use magnesium sucrate with a 45% magnesium analysis. If the pH isn't too high, we may want to use dolomitic limestone. So now to balance this water, look at that ratio. I can't achieve a 2.5-to-1 ratio. Why? I'm targeting 6 pounds a K, half a pound per month. To get there and create the proper ratios, I can only create a 1.25-to-1 ratio of calcium to sodium. But I still keep my calcium-magnesium ratio and my calcium-potassium ratio in check. And notice the difference. Now we're amending the soil less. So I don't know if anybody in this room has ever heard this from a wastewater treatment plant who's trying to go out and sell the recycled water. You won't have to apply as much fertilizer. Have you heard that? And a lot of times, they're right. But you're now going to spend that extra money that you're saving on managing the high sodium and chloride. So now you're going to be applying carboxylic acid and calcium and other things to manage the high sodium to maintain plant health. So they're right on one aspect of it, but on the other, it's going to cost you more money to manage the high sodium and the high chloride that is naturally occurring in the recycled water. And again, to get 21.4 total pounds of calcium, we're applying 13.6, and you can see the math there. So now, we had a high EC in this water source. Here we have a lower EC, and we're at 1.1, but look at the adjusted SAR. Do you know how many grass species that will survive with an adjusted SAR of 35? Paspalum. That's about it. So this is creating a real issue, and what's driving this adjusted SAR? Remember, SAR is calcium and magnesium versus sodium. Adjusted SAR takes bicarbonate into consideration. Look at the bicarbonate, and look at the pH. So what would this water source be a candidate for? Acid injection. So that way we can reduce the pH. If we can get that pH down to a neutral or 6.5, what will happen is we'll get rid of about half the bicarbonate, if not more. Now it becomes less of a detriment. But we still have 251 parts per million sodium. Look how much calcium we have, 2.89. We have 0.34 in magnesium. So our combined total here is less than 5 parts per million, and we have 251 parts per million sodium. Would you like to work at this golf course where they're using this water source? It'd be a nightmare. So you would have to inject, you'd have to acidify, there's thing management strategies you'd have to put in place to be able to survive. And this is how I would amend the soil, and notice now we went from 1.25 all the way down to 0.5. This water actually had a lower EC than the last water quality, but yet the sodium versus calcium is so low that if we try to amend the soil to correct the ratios, we're going to have a self-induced salinity issue. And sometimes there's an old saying, in fact Jack Holt at Pebble Beach told me this long ago, and he said, Brad, it's not what you didn't do sometimes it's what you did do that causes you problems. And I agree. So you can self-induce salinity issues by trying to amend the soil too much. That's why mapping all this out, using the tools that you have, the testing, you can actually create the roadmap to ensure your success. And you can see now we have to apply 21.6 to 22 pounds because really all of these things were non-existent in the water, and we're still only creating a 0.5 to 1 ratio of calcium to sodium. Influences. What impacts salinity? This is a golf course south of San Francisco called Half Moon Bay. They built the Ritz-Carlton on site by the ocean course, and I've been testing it for years. When they moved the golf course down, or this actual green, down by the ocean, they had to move it because they were building the Ritz-Carlton. What happened was, now when I tested this green, it had twice the sodium, twice the chloride of any other golf course green on this particular golf course, because they all sat away from the ocean. So the surf hitting against the rocks and the spray that came up on this green influenced the sodium and the chloride. So what else? What else influences salinity? Water softeners. Aren't they popular? What do you put in a water softener to soften the water? And what is the definition of hard water? The definition of hard water is a high concentration of calcium and magnesium ions. In Colorado, you have a good concentration of calcium ions. So you're susceptible to hard water, water spots, scale buildup in your pipes. So water softeners use sodium chloride and they use potassium chloride. Now, if you're a budget-minded housewife or husband doing the grocery shopping and you have to pick up your monthly allotment of salt for the water softener, potassium chloride is 3 times as much money as sodium chloride. So what do you think most people are buying? Sodium chloride. And what's happening now when they flush their toilets, when they take showers, they run their dishwasher, their clothes washer, that sodium chloride is going into the septic system down to the water treatment plant, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And where it's actually going and it's getting down to our aquifers. So what I'm seeing also is a rapid increase in sodium and chloride in water being pulled from the groundwater. Next is a fertilizer source. So we have muriate of potash and sulfate of potash. Unfortunately, a lot of times on a fertilizer bag, they say potash. You have to look at the derived from to determine whether or not it's sulfate of potassium chloride or sulfate of potash. The other thing that's kind of neat, and I don't know if you guys have ever realized it, now sulfate of potash goes against, but potassium sulfate would be a perfect example. When you look at raw source materials, the cation is always the first name. So potassium sulfate, potassium chloride, calcium chloride, ammonium sulfate, ferrous sulfate. Ferrous is your cation, sulfate is your anion. So whenever you're looking, if you have high chloride in your water, would you want to use MOP? No. You'd want to use sulfate of potash. So that way you're not antagonizing the high chloride that's already coming in with your water. So be aware of that. Waste-based organic fertilizers versus meal-based. What comes along with manures? Salt. Sodium, chloride, sulfates, nitrates. But yet meal-based, bone meal, blood meal, much cleaner, much lower salt index. Agriculture, we always blame the poor farmers. We blame farmers for years. Why? Because they use materials that are economical, because at the end of the day, it's about growing the maximum yield at the least amount of money to maximize their profit potential. So that means they're using calcium chloride, they're using potassium chloride, but guess what? They get to till the soil. They can disc it at the end of the season. What do you guys do? You're in a no-till environment. You have to manage, everything comes over the top, and you have to push it down. Runoff from HOA-based communities, and I see this as an issue. Some of the worst water I've ever seen. Why? Somebody cleans out their garage. They got an herbicide in there that is outdated, they can't even read the label. They don't even know what to apply it at, so what do? They turn on their hose and they start pouring it down the gutter, and it goes down the drain and out to the holding pond. And that poor golf course has no idea, and then has to wonder why they have areas that are showing signs of stress. Although diluted, it's still an herbicide. And there are other toxic compounds too that we have found. In fact, there's Pacific Ag Labs up in Oregon that I've had trouble with certain golf courses. We send the sample off, and sure enough, it comes back with the active ingredient that is an herbicide or something. We have no idea how it got in there. Whether it was sabotage, a homeowner, or what have you. Time, lack of rainfall, irrigation practices. So the longer you go between rainfall occurrences, the more the salts in your water has a chance to accumulate. So rain is a beautiful thing. Knowledge is power. Knowing and understanding your water quality, the volume being used and when, and the relationship to the weather. If you remember the questionnaire, it was 3 different times. You flush, when do you start? How many times do you flush? When do you end? When's your growing season? How much water do you use during the cooler periods of the year? And what times of year do you use no water? Do you need to amend the soil when you're not using any water? Probably not, because what you amended during that water use will probably carry you through. So I always implement amendments a month prior to the onset of using major water usage. So that way you get out in front of it, you start getting that soil condition to be able to dilute that water. Nutrient, constitution, contribution impact, the current soil status. You always balance your soils first. Don't go to the water imbalances first, because you're just going to maintain that imbalance. But if you balance the soil first and maintain balance, now you can proactively balance and manage it based on the constituents coming in with your water. And then soil testing becomes more of a monitoring tool as opposed to a reactionary tool. And the other thing to remember is, what is the cation exchange capacity? What's the soil's ability to hold nutrients? Does sand hold nutrients? No, it's void of CEC. There's no net negative or positive charge on sand. That's why we use them to construct USGA greens. If we do have poor water quality, we can leach, move it, push it out the drains, and evacuate it. So if you have organic matter, if the grains are 15, 20 years old, and you've built up the organic matter, now your highest nutrient content is going to be up in that organic layer. And once you get below that, you're still going to have the decomposition of organic acids over time, so you're going to hold some nutrients. You're going to have a higher CEC. Now you can amend with more to keep things pushing through. But if you have a CEC of 2.5 or 3, and you're applying enough material to drive a CEC of 7, you're wasting your money. Because really all that's happening is you're applying amendments, pushing them through, and they're not breaking down and becoming available before the plant has a chance to take them up. Water percolation and drainage is key. There's an old saying in golf that golf course construction is 80% common sense, or I'm sorry, but I say, how's it going? 80% drainage and 20% common sense. And if you don't have the common sense, add more drainage. So the use of technology, you've got the drill and fill, you have the deep time, the Air2 G2, which is a phenomenal machine but very slow. Syssus has just come out with a new compressor type aerifier that goes down 5 to 6 inches and injects air at the same time you aerify. There's XGD drainage. Has anybody cut in XGD drainage in old push-up grains? That's a wonderful tool because what they do is they cut in channels, and where we've actually cut this into golf courses using poor water quality, the year following the implementation of XGD drainage, we've been able to keep salinity at half the level it was prior to using the XGD. So it is a tool that can be used if you have old push-up greens and no subsurface drainage. And at the end of the season, you're seeing the melting out. Planet Air is another one. It also makes a difference. I just touched on the fact, do you have subsurface drainage or not? USGA spec greens have subsurface drainage. California greens typically do too. Push-up greens? No. Usually a lot of times it's either native soil pushed up or native soil pushed up, sand capped. But you're still limited on how you can move those salts and manage them because there's no way to evacuate them out. I mentioned this. Sometimes it's not what you didn't do, but what you did do that causes your problems. Don't overload and create self-induced salinity issues. Irrigation management. Use the moisture meter. And moisture meters are popular, whether it's a POGO, whether it's the Spectrum. These moisture meters will help you determine at what point your grass will wilt, where you need to keep your moisture levels above to get through the entire day until you get your irrigation cycle back on that night. More importantly, use this to make the correlation between your water quality and moisture levels. Because after a flush, at 25% moisture, you can stay hydrated all day long. But if you have recycled water and you have salt buildup and a lot of sodium and chloride in particular, your wilt point may be at 22, 23%. You won't make it through the day when you start out at 25%. So make that correlation. This is a picture from the San Francisco 49ers practice facility. This is 6 weeks after sodding. So this was about light year water, giving the nutrients, pre-plant, endomycorrhizae. I write their fertility programs both for Levi Stadium as well as the practice facility. Assessing water quality. The SAR, we talked about it. Concentration of sodium versus calcium and magnesium. The adjusted SAR takes into consideration bicarbonate and its precipitation potential. It impacts soil permeability, the ability of water to infiltrate into the soil and percolate and ultimately drain. Gas exchange is reduced by low soil permeability. So CO2 is very beneficial. As it evolves to the atmosphere, the canopy picks it up and is used in the carbohydrate production process. But what happens if your soils seal off? What happens if you have high organic matter? What if you're plugged up with salts reacting with bicarbonate and calcium, magnesium, and water's not infiltrating? Gases can't evolve to the atmosphere? What if CO2 accumulates in the root zone, becomes toxic? So it's no longer beneficial. You'll actually see yellowing and a thinning of turf as a result of it. That's where you would want a spike or needle tine. And if you get a light breeze blowing across the green, that light breeze will actually draw the gases out of those holes and actually draw the gases from your root zone and help you. It's the Venturi effect. Organic matter, water movement, oxygen, gas exchange. What happens when organic matter gets wet? It's like a sponge, it swells and it impedes airpore space. What happens when it dries out completely? It becomes hydrophobic, it's like a duck's back. So now you have to get it re-wet, and you have to get it re-wet uniformly. And what happens? Water takes a path of least resistance. So it's always good maybe to use, in high organic situations, use a penetrant if you need to re-wet your soil. So that way you reduce the surface tension, get water moving uniformly down and through. Then if you need to use a moisture retention agent, now that you have uniform moisture, you can apply it and know that you have good uniform holding capabilities. You're not going to be dry here, wet over there. So this is a pretty cool slide that illustrates the carbohydrate production process, and I always refer to the plant as a factory, the carbohydrate production factory. You can see the carbon dioxide, the nutrients in the water entering the factory, and what's coming out the smokestacks. Water and soil O2, and what's the factory producing? Carbohydrates. If the plant's producing carbohydrates efficiently, 50% of what's being produced is building a carbohydrate storage system. Most of you guys in here are growing cool season grass. Your root system is your carbohydrate storage system. If you're growing warm season grass, rhizomes and stolons. If your plant's producing carbohydrates efficiently, 50% is translocated down to the roots. 50% of that, or 25% of your total carbohydrate production, is then exuded out the root tips as a metabolite to feed the microbes. Creates the symbiotic relationship between the microbes and your plant. Plant is feeding it cake and cookies. Now it's growing its family, populations are increasing, it's breaking down nutrients as water moves through their colony forming units, it's taking up water soluble nutrients, it becomes symbiotic. So it all starts with producing the carbohydrates and being able to feed the indigenous microbes that are in your soil. The single biggest input assessing water quality, bicarbonate. If you're over 100 parts per million or 15 parts per million carbonate, you might want to look at using acidic-based fertilizers to decompose it or acidify your irrigation water. calculate the SAR and the adjusted SAR to verify the degree of impact that these ions will have on the availability of calcium and magnesium. Know the salinity tolerance of your turf species. Are all turf species created equal? No. The lowest salt tolerance is what? Poa. Bluegrass, and rye, bed. You get into your fescues, then you get into Bermuda, which has a higher tolerance, your highest salt tolerance being paspalum, or alkali grass as well. But paspalum has the highest salt tolerance. But even paspalum, you have to typically grow in with good water quality and then transition it over to the bad water. And in areas where I'm working in Hawaii, and when I was working over in the Arab Emirates, they were actually pulling water straight out of the ocean after we established paspalum. They were using salt water straight out of the ocean. But the problem with that is on sand-based grains is fine, but on clay soils, it would deflocculate the soils. You'd lose your aggregation, your pore spacing, your ability to move water through, and that would create issues. So to every action, there's a reaction. Excess carbonate, what's that going to do? It's going to drive your pH up and impact the availability of nutrients. Lime-induced iron chlorosis, are you guys familiar with that term? In New Mexico, when I was doing the seminars down there, they called it the yellows. And I couldn't figure out what were they talking about, the yellows. Well, late in the year, we always get the yellows. The grass gets spindly. Where we turn the mower, the grass wants to turn up. And I started looking at their water quality, it had high bicarbonate. And the bicarbonate was precipitating out the calcium and magnesium. Carbonate was driving the pH up. So their metals were not available. Calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, zinc, copper were all unavailable. So they were getting lime-induced iron chlorosis. Once we created a program to offset that, they weren't having those problems anymore. Titration test, is that something you guys are familiar with? A titration test is a test to be able to determine how much of a specific acidifying product you need to inject into your water, usually per acre foot or per 100,000 gallons, to be able to reach a pH down to neutral and down to 6.5, down to 6, so you can see what that curve is. You can determine based on your budget whether or not this product is going to be cost effective. If you're just shooting from the hip and you're applying an acidifying product and injecting it, you don't really know what it's doing to your pH. You don't know where ultimately it's ending up. If you send it to a lab that's qualified to do the titration test, you're not guessing anymore. You know exactly you need 20 gallons per 100,000 gallons of water going through your irrigation system to get your pH to a pH of 7. It's a very valuable tool. This is old as sin. I'm sure you guys have seen this multiple times. This is the pH chart to show you the availability of nutrients. 6.5 to 7.5 is good, 6 to 7 for nutrient availability, but microbial activity, 6.5 to 7.5 is ideal. But this, I just wanted to show this because I wanted to talk about the availability of nutrients, and you could see how pH affects them. So management options. Acidification of irrigation water to a pH of 6.5 will reduce bicarbonate by at least 50%. Again, do the titration test so you're not guessing. You know how much you need to apply based on a certain volume of water running through your irrigation system. You have sulfuric acid, N-furic acid, synthetic acids, sulfur burner, acidifying fertilizers. Why is ammonium considered an acidifying fertilizer? pH is a function of hydrogen. Ammonium is NH4, so 1 part nitrogen, 4 parts hydrogen. The other part is sulfate. So it's a good acidifying fertilizer because you got both hydrogen and sulfur. Water management and application of wetting agents and picking the right wetting agent. What works for one golf course may not work for another. So if you talk to your buddy up the road and he's using brand XYZ, do your own testing. Determine what you need based on your organic matter, the characteristics of your soil. You may not need a holding agent. You may need a penetrant to move water through. A wetting agent may actually set you up. If you have poor water quality, now you're going to hold on to that water that has high salinity. Now you're going to choke the plant off. So utilize a strategy to determine what wetting agent or penetrant is going to be best in your situation. Aerification and top dress, be careful not to promote the path of least resistance. Flush on the front side. Now if your greens are not taking water well, spike them or use a needle tine. Because with a 23 gallon or 27 gallon per minute, multiple heads around the grain, you could overwhelm the ability. You're not going to rush down those needle tine holes. But if you had a 5/8 or a 3/4 inch hole open on a 2x2 pattern, you know what? Water's all rushing down that hole. Does that all make sense to everybody? Water treatment, electromagnetic energy, magnation. I don't know if you've heard of this device. I have 10 years experience working with magnetic resonance. I've worked with UC Irvine, I've worked with the SCGA, the NCGA, I've worked with University of New Mexico, UC Riverside. You cannot test water on the front side, run it through electromagnetic energy and test it on the other side and look at a standard water test. It's not a filter, it's a treatment system. What it does is it induces extremely low frequency resonant energy into the water. It uses the EC of the water as a conductor. And when you hit 7.82 hertz, which is smack dab in the lowest of 5 frequency ranges known as Schumann's resonances, what happens, it'll travel for miles. So you can actually get the benefit of this field breaking up the water molecules, reducing surface tension, and using less water to stay better hydrated. And that's what I've seen, and I just finished an 8-month case study at a golf course who always lost the bottom of a fairway. They used recycled water out of 36 holes. It was their worst hole. So what I did is I fit 3 2-inch magnesium units on lateral fairway lines. So that way we had an area that had nothing but magnetically treated water. Then we had a transition zone that got cross-contaminated, and we had an untreated zone. Some of the things that, and I'm going to show the pictures from that study because we just concluded November 1st. Schumann's resonance are 5 distinct frequency ranges. ELF is known as extremely low frequency, and that's energy. It travels for miles. That's how they pick up earthquakes halfway around the world. Waves crashing on the shore, extremely low frequency resonant energy. It drives the aerobic metabolic pathway. It's antagonistic to pathogens. In fact, when we did the study with Dr. Earthman at UC Irvine, what we found, first of all, he thought it was plugged in because he was picking up the electrical pulse like a heartbeat. And whereas it's not. It's rare earth magnets that's creating this frequency. And what ended up happening is the iron-fixing bacteria fell out of active state into spore state. We also disrupted scale formation in the piping. What it did is soften the scale. It ruined the housing that the iron-fixing bacteria was using as a home to protect itself while it was eating the walls of the pipe. At the end of the day, we vacuumed up the bottom of the aquarium because this was all testing that we were doing, and we didn't have any more problems with scale or iron-fixing bacteria. We also saw the same thing at a nuclear reactor at 3 Mile Island, which drew water from the river down below to cool the reactors. They were actually introducing balls that had sandpaper coating on it. And they were putting it at the input, letting it run all the way up to the discharge, and then collecting them. And it worked at disrupting the scale formation, but it didn't work on the fittings. So the fittings still rotted out. They put on this magnetic system, and they found it disrupted the scale, disrupted the iron-fixing bacteria, and they didn't have the problem with having to replace the pipeline. At that time, it was about $1 million a mile to replace. It introduces nanobubbles. Again, you can't visibly see these. You have to use a micron microscope. So a lot of people that put down this technology aren't looking at the right technologies to determine what this type of treatment is actually doing to the water. So you're getting nanobubbles, remote soil O2. You're also inducing photons into the water. It reduces surface tension, and yes, we did buy a very expensive tensionometer. We tested the water before it went through the magnetic field and after, and we saw a reduction in surface tension. So that was something that was measurable to the normal layman. The price of a tensionometer is very expensive, though, at least the one that's used to reduce surface tension. There are other tensionometers that don't do what I'm talking about. Better water infiltration and percolation, we've seen a 10 to 30% water reduction. With Black Hawk Country Club in Danville, what we did is we started equal amounts of water. After 2 months of treating, we went to a 10% deficit. After 2 more months, we went to a 20% deficit, and that's where we stayed through the end of the trial. We also, one of the big benefits, and Berenberg Seed did a study on this. They actually ran seed through that magnetic field before they applied it. Germination went from 89% to 98% and also germinated quicker. So that was huge. And when we did the study at Black Hawk, we saw the same thing. The untreated, maybe 10% of the seed had germinated. In the transition zone, we maybe had about 30 to 40% that had germinated. In the treated, all the seed had germinated. The difference was night and day going from untreated to treated. So I happened to pick the right day to visit the golf course. If I had been there a week later, it only would have germinated. But it just illustrated how you can expedite and help become more successful, because sometimes you're pushing the envelope when you overseed. It's getting close to the end of the season. Same thing with aerification. It seems like general managers are pushing back aerification dates. So whereas we used to aerify always in September, started moving into October. Now I have customers who are aerifying the first and second week in November. That doesn't give you a whole lot of time to heal. And if you don't heal before it gets cold, what's going to happen? You're going to be looking at those aerification holes all winter long. Oops. So here, this is, again, on July 28th, we started this trial in April, about April, the end of March, 1st of April. On July 28th, I was taking soil tests on a monthly basis, and we were taking EC readings on a monthly basis. This is the untreated versus treated fairway, fairway 3 on the Lakeside course, Blackhawk Country Club in Danville, California. On the untreated, do you notice that brown line right there? This fairway would not drain. And using recycled water, they have been top dressing for the last 8 to 10 years. They've built up a 3 to 4 inch sand cap. So there is a sand cap on this. But where they cut in drains, dehydrated very quickly. When you look at the transition zone, you can still faintly see the drain lines, but when we got into the treated area, we couldn't see them because of better availability of water. Again, breaking up the water molecule and actually becoming more available to the plant. So even if moisture levels were lower, the plant had more available water. Otherwise, if you have high salinity, the amount of water that is available to the plant is limited. About 2 weeks after overseeding, 3 weeks, this was on October 5th, and we had overseeded in about the middle of September. I asked the superintendent to pull 4 plugs from treated and untreated. This was the resulting picture. So you can see that the untreated has a shallower root system and less mass, and the treated has a stronger root system. It's deeper, and it has more mass. Better ability to pull up water and nutrients, which is going to make it stronger, which is relative to this last slide. November 1st. We've gone 8 months, no rainfall, not a drop. So untreated versus a treated fairway. The untreated, you'll notice out here, we sent this off to Jenny McMorrow at Turf Diagnostics, came back as rapid blight. Rapid blight is a slime mold derived from the ocean. When sodium gets up to a level of 110 or more parts per million, it becomes a conducive environment for it to become active. And because we had little rainfall, we're using water that has 100 parts per million sodium in it, they started seeing the detrimental effects of rapid blight and turf that was browning out. Here's more untreated turf going into the transition zone, and this was the treated area. We had maybe 1 to 2% that was affected versus about 50%. And one of the things that we did is we actually read, and we read an EC meter, a direct EC meter. So we were going down and chasing the salts. So unlike a Pogo or a Scoutmaster from Spectrum, what we did do is we actually would go into the first quarter inch, half inch, inch and a half, 2 inches, and watch the reading on our direct EC meter. We used distilled water to make sure the salts were in solution and we could properly measure resistance. What we found was the treated area, our biggest concentration of salts was down about 4 to 6 inches. On the untreated, the salts were up in the upper 1 inch, which again is impeding air pore space, the ability of water to infiltrate and percolate. So I wanted to show these trial pictures because they're brand new. I haven't even written the report of the abstract yet. But I thought this was pretty cool to illustrate some of the benefits of the electromagnetic energy. So management options. What kind of solids do you have in your water? Is there sand, silt, clay, organic particles that can potentially clog the irrigation delivery system, plug soil micropores? Artificial plow pan. Is that something you guys are familiar with, that terminology? What happens if you aerify to the same depth constantly? Say you're going to a depth of 4 inches. Now you have fines in your water, or you have fines in your soil. So you're breaking up the compaction down to 4 inches. Now all your fines want to settle down at that depth of aerification that you never go against. You're always aerifying to the same depth. You create a perched water table or an artificial plow pan. My strong recommendation is to mix up the depth of aerification. Sometimes you don't need to go 4 inches. Sometimes you just want to get through the thatch. Go 2 or 3 inches. Then once in a while, do a vertigrain or a soil reliever. Go down 6, 8 inches. So that way you're mixing up the depth of your aerification to prevent that artificial plow pan from forming. Also, it cause excess wear on the sprinkler nozzles if you have debris and your pumping components. Consider filtering the water or providing settling ponds. Sometimes we don't have that convenience. Also, biologically, what's in the water? Is there nematodes, weed seeds, algae, fungal spores? Is there chemicals? We talked about HOA runoff water. That can be a real issue. The other big thing that I see is flood years. or rivers will flood their banks and flood into irrigation lakes and carry with it mussels. Next thing you know, the next year, the end of their irrigation system's all plugged up from the formation of mussels. So there are products that you can use. There's HTC, which is water solve. It's a hydrogen peroxide product that breaks down the shells of the mussels. So it can actually help you clean it up. What is it? Manganese promanganate. I don't know if you've ever seen this product. It's purple, and it is a pain in the butt to apply. But it will also devastate the mussels if you have an issue with mussels in your irrigation system. And what it is you have to put it in at the pump station. You turn on each individual head one at a time, and it's a laborsome job. And when the purple water starts coming out, turn that off, you go to the next head. And it's, it takes a long time and it's very laborious. Check levels of actual nutrients, make adjustments in your fertility program. I think I've driven that point home. Account for nutrient additions or any induced deficiencies. Calculate the nutrient ratios to adjust your inputs based on what is coming in with your single biggest input. Determine the toxic ions. And I look at toxic ions as being an overaccumulation. Sodium's an essential nutrient. It's one of 17 essential nutrients. And some of you may say, wait a minute, there's 16 essential nutrients, but now they're recognizing nickel as an essential nutrient because of its role, its enzymatic role in urea reductase. So urea levels can get to toxic levels without the presence of nickel, creating the enzyme to reduce it. Determine your toxic ions, sodium, chloride, boron, sulfur, what the pH is, potential impact on the turf root system, aerobic soil, as well as foliar damage. Nutrient loads, we've discussed it extensively. It's going to vary based on site specifics and can change seasonally or in extreme cases on a daily basis. And I have seen pH fluctuate from 7.5 to 8.5 in one day. Irrigation and water management is paramount. Own it. And I'm not saying that to be sarcastic or antagonistic. What I'm saying is get your arms around your water quality, because there are a lot of constituents coming in with your water. And if you own it and understand it, you can manage it. It doesn't own you. Otherwise, it can make your life, a living nightmare. Check for the residual sodium carbonate to assess the impact on soil structure. The index, what you're doing is you're taking bicarbonate, HCO3, dividing it by its conversion factor of 61, carbonate by 30. And then you take that total and deduct it from the amount of calcium, magnesium, and you see where you fall to see if there's a potential detriment from it. Know your soil types to help determine the level of aerification, amendments, and leaching, flushing that will be needed. If you have good water quality, you may not need to flush. If you have moderate water quality, you may only need to flush every 2 months. Monitor your water and understand that. Know how often you need to flush. Because if you're flushing too often, guess what? You're flushing a lot of good nutrients right through the root zone, and now you're costing yourself extra money that is unnecessary. You only need to flush if you need to move the detrimental salts. And aerification. If you have a new course construction and you have very minimal organic matter and no compaction, do you need to aerify? No, you can probably go 4 or 5 years without aerifying. Do a good top dressing program. The solution to pollution is dilution. So as your organic matter accumulates, keep top dressing, light, frequent top dressings, and dilute that thatch so water can migrate down and through. Otherwise, if you get a thatch mat or you layer because you're not top dressing enough, guess what happens? You layer, and now you're creating perched water tables, and it backs water up, you don't draw down oxygen, and now you're going to have a shallow rooting system, and you're going to have a greater potential for anaerobic conditions. All right, we're going to head down the home stretch. This is the practice facility for the Oakland Raiders, next to the Oakland Airport in Alameda. This was our first mow on the ryegrass overseed this last spring. I think this was in March. Check ECW and TDS for the impact on turf grass. Establish the leaching fraction. So the water EC and the salt tolerance of the turf species by 100 is just a down and dirty, quick and easy leaching fraction. Some of the newer leaching fractions based on water restrictions would take this equation and reduce it by 50%. So say you had water that had an EC of 1, the salt tolerance of the species was 4. What you would actually have is 25, you'd have to apply 25% more water than what's needed for evapotranspiration to keep the salts moving. Why? Because if you're watering every night, you're only watering 5 minutes, the salts in your water will accumulate in the upper 2 inches. And through evaporation and transpiration by the plant, venting water vapor to the atmosphere, does Mother Nature take the salts with it when she evaporates water? No. She leaves all the salts behind. So if you apply enough water to keep the salts moving, then you're never going to have the accumulation at the surface of the salts. So that's just a leaching fraction. Typically, it's based on having an EC of 0.75 or more, but it's more relative to what makes up the EC as to what the minimum EC is. Or 0.75 is a good rule of thumb. So in this case, if I had an EC of 0.75 divided by 4 times 100, said that 25% of extra water, now I only need 19%. So it's a quick and nerdy way to figure out your leaching fraction. It's funny because in all the days of doing irrigation, everybody's talking about deficit water. So if you know what your ET rate is, most guys watering cool season grass, what are you, about an 80% deficit watering? Is that about right? And if you're growing warm season grass, it's about 60%. The leaching fraction would need to add a little more water to that. Check the sulfur levels in the water. If sulfur is 60 parts per million or more, or SO4 is over 180, aeration and lime-based amendments and/or calcium nitrate will assist with management. You'll make your own gypsum, plus provide oxygen. Remove excess sulfur or sulfates to help minimize anaerobic issues and black layer formation. If you have a lot of thatch, you've got 15-year-old grains and you've got 3/4 of an inch of thatch, where do you typically see your black layer? Right at the interface between that organic layer and your growing medium. Why? Because you're not drawing down oxygen. And when that thatch gets wet, it swells. So that upper portion right at the interface is going to be anaerobic. Something that's good to do if you have a black layer area, a front of a green, a compacted area, take a plug, leave it out for about 4 or 5 hours and go look at that plug. You will be surprised how fast it will oxidize and how fast that black layer will go away. The aerobic metabolic pathway favors plant health and vigor, light, air, water. Soil O2 is absolutely critical. The anaerobic pathway favors stress and disease. High sodium, low potassium, turf cannot differentiate between these single positive charged cations. Foliar feed K to minimize plant demand to pull from the soil. It's the best way to minimize it. So that way that plant's getting the K it needs without pulling up the sodium. High sodium will restrict potassium uptake. Watch for deficient levels of iron and manganese. Phosphorus and potassium are critical to maintenance of a good root system in salt-challenged conditions. But what you may need to do, your annual P and K rates may need to be increased by 25 to 50% above non-affected salt sites. Best to apply through spoon feeding for consistency and availability. Also the time of year. Your biggest demand for phosphorus, spring root initiation. Second biggest demand, fall root initiation. But if you look at Krebs' cycle, from capturing energy from the sun, photosynthesis, into chlorophyll, into carbohydrate production, into amino acids, ATP, and your plant's biological objective is complete protein production. The relevance of that is that if you're producing complete proteins, pathogens cannot digest them. They're single-cell organisms with simple digestive systems. One of the critical components in producing complete proteins, that last step, especially in the winter, organic nitrogen. So whether it's ammonium nitrogen or nitrate nitrogen, it weighs 14.01. Organic nitrogen weighs 15. It's either an electron or a proton amino acid that links together the polypeptide chains of amino acids and allows conversion to a complete protein. And you have to have all the amino acids in place to do so. High calcium and magnesium to manage sodium can restrict potassium uptake. Again, foliar feed that potassium. Apply N to K in a 1-to-1 or even a 1 to 1.5 ratio. So you're putting out more K than N, converting that in. And if you're using a carbon-based program, you can reduce the amount of nutrients you're applying. Why? Because the carbon will absorb the nutrients and re-release them. So if you have a high sand environment, it's good to put down a carbon source. The one thing is, if you apply a pound of N and you do a soil test right after and you have a soil conditioner that is carbon-based, you will not see that pound of N because some of it will have already been absorbed. There is a new testing methodology. It's available through AgSource Lab. It's called the Soil Health Test. Mineralizable N, mineralizable P, carbon to nitrogen ratios. They'll take a sample out of your bag, put it in a chamber, seal it, and for 24 hours they will measure the CO2 evolution, what's known as a Solvina CO2 test, to determine if you have microbial activity, if you're getting CO2 evolution. That way, again, starts with photosynthesis into carbohydrate production, chlorophyll. So it's important that you help your plant every step of the way and know what it needs and when it needs it. In the presence of very high chloride levels, increase N by 10 to 25%. All right, there is no replacement for proper nutrient management. We talked about light, air, water first, nutrient management, sound irrigation, and cultural practices. Don't guess, get the tools and information critical to your success. At this point, I'd like to thank the USGA, Brian Whitlark, who is the USGA agronomist for the Southwest, who did the normalization chart. The PGA, Thomas Bastis, a good friend of mine, I've worked with other PGA tour agronomists, Ronnie Duncan, Bob Carroll, Mike Huck, Larry Stoll, Wendy Glertner, Ollie Haravandi, where I got my first taste of recycled water on the golf course when he was doing his studies. All of these people's research has helped me help you guys. And for the great research they've done over the years, I want to thank them. But most importantly, who I would like to thank are the superintendents I work with and all you guys in this room. Because without you guys sharing information, I couldn't be where I'm at today. So really, at the end of the day, it's being able to visit you guys, being able to go out, dig, smell, taste, touch, and determine all these different factors that impact your ability to grow grass and help you guys grow based on your site specifics. And again, keep in mind, you may have a buddy that's 5 miles up the road that has no problems growing grass and you may struggle. Look at the site specifics and don't bite into cookie cutter programs. Calculate the inputs at your golf course, what's in your water, what's your soil like, how well do you drain. Use your site specifics to develop your program. So that way it's site specific. Because cookie cutter programs can cause failure, and that's the one thing you don't want to do, because you're only as good as your grass is today, and especially if you're at a country club. Anyway, thank you for your attention, thank you for attending. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'm also at the LL Johnson booth. If you want to bring a water test, a soil test, I will be at their booth tomorrow. I would be glad to review it with you and go over and answer any questions you have. You guys have a great day.